was and probably always will be my favorite character in the MCU. As a kid, the reason why Tony was such an inspiration for me was simply because he has no superpowers. Everything he uses to fight the equivalent of gods stems from his own mind and character. But Tony wasn't always a hero.
He says, "Welcome, Tony Stark, the most famous mass murderer in the history of America."
There are several interesting points we have to tackle regarding Tony's character. The first part, of course, being his redemption.
Peace.
On top of that, he's a super genius. There's been too many cases where bad writing turns an intelligent character into an annoying one. So how do we prevent that with Tony Stark, who's one of the biggest geniuses of them all?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not Tony Stark.
And the final point, he is a super genius. Yeah, I know I said that already, but this time I mean it in the way of, well, how do you write a character who's 10 times smarter than you? And aside from that, how do you make it believable? These are all points I'll cover in this video, and let's start off with Tony's redemption arc. Back when we were first introduced to Iron Man, Tony was a weapons manufacturer, profiting off the suffering of innocents. And not only that, he was also quite the douchebag.
I don't like it when you have plans.
I'm allowed to have plans on my birthday.
It's your birthday.
Yes.
I knew that. Already?
So, let's roll back time and see how Marvel managed to turn the greatest mass murderer in the history of America into one of the most beloved heroes in modern cinema. Now that I'm analyzing it, I find it kind of funny. The moment the film thinks, yeah, I think the audience knows enough about him for now, he just gets absolutely dunked on. The poor guy was living the good life, and then he gets shot at by his own weapons, blown up by his own bomb, kidnapped, tortured, becomes depressed, and the only good thing to happen to him is he meets Jensen, who is his mentor of sorts.
Either way, and if they don't, I'll probably be dead in a week.
Well then, this is a very important week for you, isn't it?
Need welding gear, I don't care if it's aesthetically inappropriate. Need a soldering station.
After that, he stops being depressed, saves his mentor, has the Iron Man version of a training montage, and then he sees his mentor die.
Don't waste it. Don't waste your life.
And finally, after being put through so much, he comes out as the hero at the climax of the film, crushing the bad guys and saving the day. Except that's not the climax, it's only the first third of the movie. So much character development happened in that cave. Despite being packed so full of important details and moments for the characters, not once did it make me feel overwhelmed. I think Iron Man did an incredible job of creating such an interesting backstory for such an interesting character. A character you now not only root for, but respect. And the film keeps us hooked on the story by introducing this concept of an Iron Man suit, which most of us had never seen before at the time of watching this film. And of course, we also want to see what he does with this new life of his. The difference between the old him and the new him is so shocking, in fact, that the people closest to him are flat out surprised by what he's doing. For example, take a look at this scene.
There are two things I want to do. I want an American cheeseburger. And the other
That's enough of that.
is not what you think. I want you to call for a press conference now.
I believe Pepper was fully expecting Tony to say something dirty, considering he's been in a cave for a long time and he used to be a complete playboy. But instead, he calls for a press conference to shut down weapons manufacturing, which up until this point had basically been his life's work.
I came to realize that I have more to offer this world than just making things to blow up.
So by now, it's not a surprise that the audience roots for him. He faced death and suffering, lost people close to him, and despite all of these traumatic events, Tony proves to the audience that he's willing to sacrifice the person he was in order to change into the person he wants to become.
I shouldn't be alive. Unless it was for a reason. I'm not crazy, Pepper. I just finally know what I have to do. And I know in my heart that it's right.
And I like how by the end of the film, instead of being presented with some perfect version of Tony, we're reminded of the fact that he still has quite a few things to work on.
Hey, tell me you never think about that night.
What night?
You know.
Are you talking about the night that we danced and you went downstairs to get me a drink and you left me there by myself? Is that the night you're talking about?
So let's move on to the second point. How do we establish this character's geniusness without it coming off as annoying? Well, I believe it mostly comes down to the intention behind that demonstration. Putting it simply, are you doing something in the film so the character can display their intelligence, or are you instead using that character's intelligence to do something for the film? Here's an example. This is a scene from Star Wars The Force Awakens, where Rey magically fixes the Millennium Falcon by yanking something out of the ship. One problem with the scene is, it feels like it exists only because the writers wanted to create an opportunity for Rey to show off her intellect. The other problem? This is too unrealistic, as not only is this the first time she's ever been on a Millennium Falcon,
You ever fly this thing? No!
but you also don't have to be an engineer to know that yanking out important components of the ship is not how you fix the ship.
This hyperdrive blows are gonna be pieces of us in 3 different systems.
What'd you do?
I bypassed the compressor.
On the other hand, let's take a look at this scene from Iron Man. The demonstration of his intellect, shown by the difference in levels of technology between him and his enemies, is simply a byproduct of what happens on screen. It's a pretty simple, straightforward, and upfront demonstration of the vast difference in technological capability, and the result was this becoming one of the most iconic and memorable scenes in the MCU. But let's take it a step further. Let's remove the action, tech, and explosions. How do we demonstrate the character's intellect through just their dialogue without it coming off as cringy or annoying? First, here's an example of what not to do. This is a scene from Netflix's 3-Body Problem.
Wait, hold on, don't tell me. Let me guess, you probably are.
I design self-assembling synthetic polymer nanofibers. I started a company that manufactures them for a variety of potential medical energy and materials applications.
And
I'm a senior researcher in theoretical physics group at Imperial College. I'm doing a bit of study analyzing results of particle.
Notice how this scene suffers from the same issue as the Star Wars one, where it feels like this interaction exists solely for the purpose of demonstrating these two characters' intellect. Meanwhile, let's take a look at this one from Iron Man.
What is that?
That's palladium, 0.15 grams. You need at least 1.6, so why don't you go break down the other 11?
Here, instead of this scene existing just so Tony can sound smart, the scene itself is progressing the plot. He's building an arc reactor which he'll later use to power the first ever Iron Man suit.
What could it generate?
If my math is right, I don't know as is, 3 gigajoules per second.
But I want to take this even one step further, because Tony has a trait that some of these other characters don't have. He's a complete douchebag.
Hey, Tony. Remember me?
Sure don't.
He often treats others like shit, is a complete playboy, and even leaves his best friend standing in the hot sun for 3 hours straight. So the question is, why don't we feel annoyed at Mr. Stark when he's about the same level of rude in many of these scenes?
Hey, Tony.
I'm sorry, this is the fun bee. The humdrum bee is back there.
Nice job. See you back there.
I think the main reason as to why this works is simply because the film manages to insert an element of comedy into each and every one of these interactions.
You've been called the Da Vinci of our time. What do you say to that?
Absolutely ridiculous, I don't paint.
Whether it's with the characters or with the tone of these scenes, Iron Man manages to turn all of these moments into enjoyable experiences for the audience to watch.
3 hours, you got me standing.
Waiting on you now, let's go.
Wheels up! Rock and roll!
I found that this concept heavily applies to comedy. For example, let's use this iconic duo, Conan O'Brien, the host of The Conan Show, and Jordan Schlansky, his associate producer who completes various tasks. Just by changing the tone of this segment, I can take what was originally a humorous joke.
I will honor you by filling your sake glass.
Oh, you fill mine?
You can choose
and then I can...
whether you want to do the same, return the honor for me.
And no.
And turn it into what would be perceived as an insult.
And no.
In fact, one of my favorite video game villains of all time, Handsome Jack, happens to talk about this exact thing.
Sure, it's a tough universe, but there's no excuse for being an asshole. Unless you're funny with it.
then it's kind of totally fine.
And this is basically what Iron Man manages to pull off. Every time Tony is rude in some way, the film presents it in a fashion that is enjoyable for the audience.
That lovely lady you woke up with, what was his name?
Don't do that.
Was it Ivan?
Don't do that. They'll believe that. Don't do that. Okay.
And finally, how do we write a character who's smarter than us? In Tony's case, it's relatively simple. While his character is a genius, he doesn't actually do anything in the plot that a normal person can't come up with. The suit's design and all his fancy tech, fictional inventions which don't need to be explained in a ton of detail using real science in the film. But then that poses another problem. How do we make it believable? Well, one solution is we see him going through what's basically a step-by-step process of designing, building, and using his tech. We see him assembling all the different parts of his new arc reactor. We see each individual component of his first Iron Man suit literally laid out on the table. We see him tinkering and modifying the blueprint for the Mark I suit, even before he starts working on the Mark II's design. This sort of gradual progression, instead of just having the character pop out with a newly built suit, is what allowed all of this to be believable. And I know what you might be thinking, but Film Junkie, even some parts of this process could seem unbelievable. And you'd be right, this is still crazy technology, which is why there's a second part to solving the believability problem. What Iron Man tends to do is it takes existing concepts either we or the character are already familiar with and then building on top of them, resulting in a progression that feels much more natural. The miniature arc reactor, well, he has built a normal-sized one in the past.
The arc reactor, that's a publicity stunt. Tony, come on, we built that thing to shut the hippies up.
The icing problem? Well, he's already dealt with that issue in the past for his tactical satellite.
Connect to the Cisco, have it reconfigure the shell metals, use the gold titanium alloy from the Seraphim tactical satellite.
Or even creating a new element in the second Iron Man film. He's doing this based on the work his dad had already done.
Dead for almost 20 years. Still taking me to school.
Because there's a basis for where this crazy tech is coming from, it becomes so much more realistic.
Next time.
And a final yet equally important point, without all the steps in this progression of technology, it simply wouldn't be as satisfying to watch. It's because we get to experience the journey with Tony that we care for him so much. It's because we see the suits fail and experience problems which he needs to overcome that we stay interested, wanting to witness the final result. It's kind of like playing a game. If you only ever win because it's too easy, you'll quickly lose interest. If you only ever lose because it's too hard, chances are you'll give up. There's always this game of balance that needs to be played behind the scenes. Too much to one side or the other, and things fall apart. But if you manage to get it just right, then people will always come back for more. Thankfully, every element of this film was beautifully assembled, and while each component stems from simple, ordinary concepts, the result is something spectacular. It even sparked the creation of a cinematic universe. And while for me personally, this universe has already come to an end, I'll be waiting for the day where they decide to do it again.